So I'd like to just welcome you again to Wade Stadium. If you've never been here before, thanks for coming. If you've been here, and I see a lot of faces that have seen more than once here, which is great. So we'd love to see you at our next game, which will be Friday night. So just thought I'd throw that in. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Martha. Thanks for coming in.
Luncheon in 2015. I'm Martha Bremer, Director of Fuse Duluth. We really appreciate all of you joining us today. I'd like to thank Mike and the Husky staff for making it possible for us to visit again. Since we were last here, the stadium has been under a major transformation, and our sponsor today, Kraus Anderson, was part of that, of the renovations. We appreciate the work that they've done and their support of the Fuse program. Please help me welcome Fuse Leadership Council member and Project Manager, Jonathan Ballmer.
Martha, appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I was preparing for this event, just thinking what really drives people to lead. For myself, being the chair of the College Connection program through Fuse, it's really a passion for our community. People in Duluth are just an amazing group. And as I was making the transition up here from the Twin Cities, a number of people down there said, "Oh, Duluth is a great place. Too bad there aren't any jobs there." And I just really can't stand that stereotype because it doesn't apply to our community. So one of the ways that Fuse and the Chamber really allowed me to get involved was with the College Connections program, where we're really able to get engaged with people that are looking to enter the workforce and really help them see the opportunities that exist out there. And we've got a great team that's working together on that, really to kind of make every component of that program intentional so that both our mentees and mentors are able to make those connections so we can continue to grow the workforce that's here in Duluth. Kind of moving on, and another aspect that really drives leaders is vision and commitment. And some of you may know Adam Sundberg, who is a great chiropractor, as well as the past chair of COGS for 8 years, so he's definitely got the commitment part on it. I got to know him last year as we started the first annual K8 Bike Duluth Festival, which by the way, this year is August 15th and 16th. But in his early years as a leader of COGS, they had this idea of connecting all the parks via National Trail Service. And that idea has developed into what we now know as the Duluth Traverse. And during his time, he didn't only take this idea from concept to construction, but has really started on the path of creating a premier mountain biking destination here, really for the world. So it's a pretty awesome accomplishment. And then as I look at the mayor, I really think about sustainability. And we all love this community, but we know that when he took over, we weren't really in a position to be sustainable. And I think he made some really tough choices that a lot of Midwestern cities face that due to planning, or due to his planning, were really able to put us in a position to be sustainable. And I think we're starting to see some of those benefits today, both with the project here at Wade Stadium and then our partnership with the city now with the St. Louis River Corridor project. So it's just an amazing opportunity, amazing place to be. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to the man that you all are waiting for, Mayor Ness.
Well, thank you everybody. Thanks for coming out on another gorgeous Duluth day, and it's wonderful to be here at Wade Stadium. And when we have these annual events, it's always fun to kind of reflect back on the changes that have happened over the past year. And boy, when you think about what's happened here at Wade Stadium, it is remarkable to see the transformation. How many of you were here last year? All right, so you remember that we had all sorts of problems with Wade Stadium, especially with the drainage. And if it rained 5 hours before the game started, there'd be big pools of water in the outfield, and they wouldn't be able to play the games. And so, when you have such a short season as the Huskies do, and you lose one game, that can really impact the bottom line for this business. But there are many people to thank. Our state legislators and the governor's office were really important to coming up with the dollars to make this renovation possible, as well as the voters and citizens of Duluth and their support of what we call the half tax, which was our local match. And the half tax is supporting projects all along the St. Louis River corridor, focusing on on outdoor recreation and environmental learning. And so very pleased as well to thank our partners at the Huskies and thank Mike for hosting this event here today. And it's a great venue and a great opportunity to have a conversation on a beautiful day. So I will kind of keep my comments relatively short, and I think that we all enjoy the Q&A at the end, so I'm going to try to extend that time. Whatever is on your mind, whatever issues, complaints that you might have, now would be the time to bring those up. But the title of this event was kind of giving advice to a new generation of leaders or something along those lines, and so now that I'm 41, and have kind of aged out of the Fuse group. Now I am the elder statesman imparting wisdom upon you to then take back to your organizations, or at least that's the idea. I have three pieces of advice that I give, or three kind of categories of advice that I'd like to share. One is kind of the difference between following rules and challenging convention. Now, I'm a pastor's son, and growing up, I was a very strict rule follower. So if there was a rule, I wanted to understand that rule, and I was going to follow it to the letter of the law. And that was just kind of built into my nature. And I continue that forward. And I think that a lot of us, we want to do right and follow the rules of the game. But then there's a second part of that. And I think sometimes we confuse these two ideas. And that's the conventional wisdom. And a lot of times in business and certainly in politics, there's these really defined conventional wisdoms of how you should approach your job or how you should approach certain situations. And so this conventional wisdom gets so deeply ingrained into the culture of our industries that we oftentimes assume that those are rules. And so we say, all right, well, here's a situation, and the rule is that we follow this path, but really it's a convention that has been developed over time and just a standard way of doing business, oftentimes that moves us in a counterproductive way. Or, if the convention is strong enough, that we see everybody doing the exact same thing, even though there are many other options available to us, right? And so we follow along and we lose the opportunity for a competitive advantage because we are blindly loyal to that conventional wisdom. So I want to give you an example of my first year in office. Was elected from a field of 12 candidates in 2007, took office in January of 2008, and then the world imploded in 2008, right? And we had this massive budget problems. The economy was very quickly kind of going in the tank. That was when we had subprime mortgage. The subprime mortgage problem was just emerging and was beginning to impact the stock market and kind of started what ended up being the worst recession in our country's history since the Great Depression. You all know that. Duluth was on the front end of the pain of that 2008 recession. We had huge budget problems. We had a $6 million budget deficit in the city of Duluth, and we have out of our $80 million general fund budget. We were being sued by the federal government for sanitary sewer overflows into Lake Superior. We had a huge unfunded liability in our retiree health care. All of these issues have been kind of hanging over the city for many years, and we've been kind of managing those problems, and yet we weren't taking the steps necessary to actually solve those problems. Now, coming into office, fresh face, I'm the new mayor, and seeing all these massive problems. The conventional wisdom in politics is to distance yourself from those problems. The conventional wisdom would say, take this opportunity to point fingers to politicians in the past that should have done something, and now here I am, and I'm the victim as the new mayor with all these problems hanging over us. And there is the expectation from my constituents, the residents of the city of Duluth, we almost expect the politicians to follow that conventional wisdom and just kind of by rote distance themselves from problems, try to embrace the good things that are happening, and so we just kind of accept that that's going to happen. We took a different approach in 2008. Said, we're going to own these problems. We're going to kind of embrace these problems, and we're not going to spend 1 minute blaming anybody else or pushing this off on or placing the blame in the past, because that is not productive in any way. And so we started down this path of making a number of extremely unpopular decisions. Decisions that residents and many of you in this audience hated, because we established a streetlight fee. And people are like, well, don't I pay taxes? I've been paying taxes, the streetlights are on, and now you're going to put this extra fee of $5. And many of you, I'm sure, really dislike that decision. We had to lay off city employees. We had to cut programs that people cared about in our community. And yet, by doing it, taking this approach on a consistent basis, and saying, you know, clearly it's not in my political advantage to make these unpopular decisions. Clearly it's not in my political advantage to kind of take ownership of problems that have existed for decades and try to solve them in the present day. And it's that it was the power and the importance of people recognizing when you're going counter-narrative or when you're going against the conventional wisdom. And we kind of have these, our antenna are up. And we say, well, we understand what conventional wisdom is, and we understand how we expect our leaders to react. And the moment that a leader kind of goes off of that conventional wisdom, there's kind of a ping. We say, oh, well, that's different. You know, that's something that I didn't expect. I wonder why. What was the motivation for that leader to go against the conventional wisdom? And oftentimes, I think what we found is that people are hungry for leaders to go off of conventional wisdom, especially when the industry is broken, like in politics. Everybody understands that our political system is broken. We don't see the type of leadership that we want from our political leaders, and in part because all the political leaders say this is the only way, the only path to political success. The problem in politics, and this is kind of the analysis, and every industry is different. You have to kind of understand what are the underlying premises that define or have created this conventional wisdom, right? So in politics, the core of the conventional wisdom in terms of political success is a fundamental lack of trust for the voters. And so politicians say you can't trust the voters to understand these complex issues. You need to dumb it down for them. You need to kind of, smooth out all the rough edges. You have to make sure that they understand that no sacrifice is needed from them, and that, you know, the problems are somebody else's problem. And so the conventional wisdom is so strong that all these politicians kind of follow that same path. And then there was an opportunity to take a different route, and eventually that translated into political success, taking a different approach to that leadership equation. The second piece of advice is what I will call leadership equilibrium. And this is a concept that I think is especially important in our modern social media world. And especially, and this is probably more the case for the very public leadership positions, but I think has a translation into your organizations and in your leadership path as well. And here's the concept. In the past, with traditional media, or how information is shared, there were a very few gatekeepers, or opinion leaders, that all of this information or understanding of the world would go through these small numbers of opinion leaders, gatekeepers for public opinion, and then they would kind of narrow the scope of what is, and do the interpretation of what is happening in our community, and then they would broadcast that through their traditional media sources. So whether it's the TV news, or the newspaper, or the radio, it was a pretty small number of people that were defining that community conversation. Well, today it's very different. And going back to the traditional way, so all that a mayor or an elected official had to do is to make sure that they convinced that maybe 30 people within the community that held all the power and defined the community narrative, and convince them of a one-dimensional image that would then be projected. And because of the limitations of of traditional media and very short stories, you can kind of, that's all they can really wrap their arms around, is that one-dimensional perspective of a community leader. So today is a very different thing. Today, with social media, everybody is a gatekeeper. Everybody has a chance to broadcast their opinions about our community leaders. And that makes it much more representative of the democracy than what we had before, because everybody's voice is being heard in a significant way. And it's almost like a stock market, right? And so you have an image and the image of a leader in our community, and that perception is shaped by, instead of the opinions of 30 people, it's being shaped by the opinions of thousands of people. And here's where the equilibrium part comes in. In the past, we'd have elected officials who say, I'm going to present myself as this type of leader in this way, and I'm going to stay on message, right? We've heard that before. Everybody stay on message. Continue to kind of come up with this very simple, one-dimensional idea and then pound away at it every single time. Well, that doesn't work in the social media world. And if somebody is presenting themselves as too important or too successful, and it doesn't jive with the broader understanding of how the community is reacting to that person, we will use our power and our voice through social media to take that person down. And you see it all the time. If somebody is presenting themselves as too important, there will be people that emerge from social media with a very singular goal of taking that person down and finding that equilibrium. Conversely, if a person, and we all know these people, the folks that just give so much to our community and they don't get the credit that they deserve. The democracy in social media says, I want to find that person and I want to look for opportunities to lift them up and to give them the credit that they deserve. And so it's kind of this counterintuitive approach to finding that equilibrium. Those that are presenting themselves as more important or more successful than they actually are, social media will take them down. Conversely, those that are presenting themselves in a very modest way or kind of putting the credit to others, folks will look for ways to kind of lift them up and support them in significant ways. And so, to give a couple of examples in the city of Duluth, the issue that is death to politicians in the city is potholes. And especially in the springtime, everybody hates potholes, and they hate the politicians who are responsible for potholes, right? That is just a given. That is a truism of Duluth politics. So then the question is, how do you approach this? Now, as mayor of a town that has a lot of potholes, what I could do is to justify why there are potholes. And again, I could point to the past and say, boy, if former mayors would have invested more in their potholes, we wouldn't have such a big problem. Or I could say, here's the physics behind how a pothole is created. And I could describe how, the freeze-thaw cycle and water gets under expands when it freezes and then collapse when, and I could do that. But it would be distancing myself from my responsibility as mayor, which is, these are city streets, and we're not doing a good enough job in fixing those streets. So instead, I look for opportunities to take ownership. And I try to do it in a light, you have to do it in a serious way, so that you're recognizing that people are angry, and this is a problem that we need to do a better job, but also looking for ways to kind of take on a lighter approach, taking responsibility, but also saying that we can have some fun with it. So at Homegrown this year, when we the kickoff, and there's a punk song by a band called Gil Junko. It's Mohawks is the original song, and I changed the lyrics to be about potholes. And it was fun, and people there enjoyed it. It was taking responsibility for something that is much larger than my personal responsibility as mayor. But by embracing it, people are also understanding, all right, he's acknowledging our frustration, and at the same time understanding that there's more work yet to be done. Second example that I'll give is on economic development. And we are fortunate in Duluth, especially in the last 4 or 5 years that we've seen a lot of economic development progress. And the conventional wisdom of how politicians normally react to such things is that they always look for ways to put themselves up front on economic development success. You know, kind of take credit for the private investment and the private job creation. And, you know, what we've tried to do, and David Ross, I think, is another great example of a leader who kind of sees the bigger picture. And instead of everybody trying to angle to take credit for these projects, it's a shared credit that goes to everybody that's been involved. So Apex gets credit, the Chamber gets credit, the city gets credit, but most importantly, it's Maurice's, and it's Cirrus, and it's these private companies that are making this happen. An interesting statistic that I just saw, last month, Deed rolls out their monthly unemployment figures. And last month was the highest number of jobs in the city of Duluth in our city's history. The really interesting part of that is that those were May numbers. Normally our employment peaks in September and October. So we've already broken that record, and we're going to see that accelerate through the rest of the year. So that's really exciting. And again, that is success that I don't take credit for. It's really the entire community, everybody kind of pitching in. The third idea, piece of advice, and then we can get to questions, and hopefully you guys have lots of questions, is about narrative. And, you know, what we were talking about earlier, the first two are definitely part of this idea of narrative. And it is, what is the conventional wisdom, and then kind of moving off that conventional wisdom, as well as finding that equilibrium in terms of the public perception. But I think narrative, crafting narrative, is one of the most important tools of any leader. And it can be, again, kind of big, broad, you know, the President of the United States down to an entrepreneur with 3 employees. Defining that narrative is the greatest tool that we have. Again, the conventional wisdom in politics is, boy, you know, we have these issues that are so complicated, and I try to explain complicated issues to folks and their eyes glaze over. So I've just given up on trying to describe retiree healthcare to folks, or to sanitary sewer overflow, because I get into the details and then people kind of tune out. So the importance, and this takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort, is to define a narrative that helps people understand what is the core issue, what is necessary, what is the action necessary by our community or by our organization to move this forward. And there's great opportunity for leaders to use Americans' really nuanced understanding of narrative. And this is kind of a relatively new phenomenon. And I don't think that we're kind of fully taking advantage of the skill set that Americans now have at understanding narrative. So, for example, we all consume narrative all the time, right? We consume narrative in what we read, the television programming, the movies. I think that there's no greater example than these new TV series that people binge watch, you know, 10 hours of House of Cards, right? And because there is this really interesting narrative. And the interesting thing is, whereas 20, 30 years ago, Hollywood would kind of follow the narrative path that we would expect. Right? Star Wars follows exactly the classic narrative of the young man who sets out on a journey and faces challenges and then emerges at the end. Game of Thrones is a very different narrative, right? Because at the beginning of Game of Thrones, here they're going along and you say, okay, I understand this. This is like the hero's narrative. And Stark goes down and he's going to save the day and everything will be great. And then he gets his head chopped off. And you're like, oh, that has captured my attention. Because I was expecting this narrative to go this way, then he gets his head chopped off and he's like, now what? Because it's different than our expectations. And we are so nuanced in our understanding of narrative that anything that goes off of that message captures our attention, right? So there's two ways that leaders can use this very nuanced understanding. of narrative. One is that we can define issues in terms of the narrative that people understand, and to say, and put our organization or put the individual into the role of a character in a narrative. And so then you say, here's where we're headed, here's the direction, here's what we want to accomplish, and you are playing this role within this issue. And then people say, okay, I get that, I understand it. I'll give an example of a narrative that was important for our community and has led to success. And it's kind of counter to how we were talking about this before. So sanitary sewer overflows was a major, major problem in our community. During 2001 alone, we had 8.1 million gallons of untreated sewage enter into Lake Superior. That's an embarrassment. And I was on the city council at the time, and we were about to be sued by the federal government because of these sanitary sewer overflows. And leaders would come forward and they would kind of describe the technical detail of how clean water would enter into our system, overwhelm the system, result in overflow. And you could kind of get it, but it was described in such a way that was like, oh, this seems like a problem for the engineers to figure out. Or this seems like it's a problem of neglect of infrastructure that again should have been done 50 years ago. And there was very little public support for doing what was necessary to actually fix this problem, because we saw it in terms of these technical and engineering problems that the average citizen doesn't connect with. The average citizen says, well, yeah, the engineer should do something to fix that problem. And so what we did in 2008 and 2009 is kind of create a broader narrative that includes this entire community. And to say, yes, it is a technical problem, but this reflects upon us as Duluthans. Our most sacred responsibility is to protect the greatest lake in the world. I mean, really, that's number one on our list of what Duluthians should be doing, protecting the freshwater resource in our backyard. And every time that we allow for untreated sewage to enter into that lake, we are failing in our responsibility. And it should be an embarrassment to us collectively as Duluthians that we continue to allow this to happen. And by framing it in that way, and also saying we have an opportunity not only to own our responsibility, but more importantly, we have a chance to create a narrative of success in which we will take kind of unpopular or uncomfortable action to then achieve protecting our lake, and then we can take pride in that action. And so, we implemented a $10 a month clean water surcharge so that we had dollars that we could invest into infrastructure improvements. Just recently, we were able to cancel our consent decree, which was the lawsuit hanging over the city on retiree health care 2 years ahead of schedule and well under budget. And now we as Duluthians can say we take pride in what we've accomplished. And we are now doing a better job of protecting or kind of fulfilling our obligation to the lake. The second part of narrative is, that I think is important, is patience. And to go back to the television idea, the narrative that oftentimes leaders and especially politicians want to follow is the half-hour sitcom. So we introduce all the characters, we are faced with a problem, and then that problem is resolved at the end of half an hour. That's the narrative that makes sense, and we can see, here's our starting point, here's where we're going to end, and we just have to make it very quickly through that story. The narrative that I think is more powerful, especially when you're dealing with larger issues, is starting a conversation, starting the framework of that narrative, and then allowing, and again, especially in politics, there is kind of an impatience with that, because we have other things coming at us in the immediate, in the present day. We have constituents complaining at us. We have important political folks that are unhappy with our decisions. We have an election to worry about, a re-election campaign to worry about. But it is the longer term narrative that often has the most power, and the framework, setting a narrative framework that inspires others to join in and to take their own ownership of that narrative and find ways to contribute to that. And the example that I'll use is the St. Louis River Corridor. So this was an idea that we started in 2008, 2009, as we were facing a lot of other problems and had zero resources to invest in the St. Louis River Corridor, but we started the conversation. We brought a group of 60 people together and said, let's talk about the future of the St. Louis River Corridor. What are the opportunities that we see there? And conversation started. Fast forward 5 years and we saw here's an opportunity. You know, the economy is getting better. We see some real challenges in this corridor as it relates to the housing stock. What if we now roll out this larger vision more broadly, focusing on outdoor recreation and environmental learning, which Duluth was now becoming known for, and say we can match this up. Duluth's improving reputation as an outdoor recreation destination, the needs of these neighborhoods that have been neglected for too long, and let's make a convergence of these ideas. And then by setting forth that much broader vision for the corridor and saying this is not going to be a 2-year process, it's not going to be a 5-year process, this is really a 15 to 20-year process to revitalize these neighborhoods with this current vision. We kind of put that out there, and the city is certainly taking on a number of projects, but the cool thing is that others are seeing opportunities in that. And then they're saying, I like this narrative, I want to buy into it. What can I do within my organization? What can I do within my business to contribute and find my own role in that narrative and describe what I'm doing in my organization as it relates to a narrative that has broader buy-in and broader understanding in the community. So those are the 3 pieces of advice that I have as a 41-year-old. To all of you, I hope that you find value there. But now, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Sure. The biggest risks for Duluth backsliding to where it was. It's a great question, and it's going to be a difficult one for me to answer. Clearly, there are kind of big economic forces that can change the trajectory that Duluth is on, and you know there are a handful of industries that we rely very heavily. Higher education is a really important industry in our community. What happens if all of a sudden the landscape in higher education changes dramatically and kids are no longer going to 4-year universities? That would be a major blow to our community. If the healthcare system changes dramatically and changes the economics and the employment, or you know, even the regionalism. Right now, Duluth benefits from being a regional center for a very broad area, 100 miles of services kind of located in this central place. What if all of a sudden, you know, through the internet or something, those services are better delivered in Virginia or in Grand Rapids or in International Falls, and they no longer have a need to have that centralized location in Duluth? Aviation, you know, we're an aviation-centered community. A lot of jobs in aviation, a lot of the growth and new monies coming back into Duluth are in the aviation sector. So there is definitely kind of those very tangible changes within the broader world's economy that could impact and likely will impact Duluth. We just need to be in a position to change that. But as somebody that grew up in this community, and I grew up at a time when Duluth was a very different place, in the 70s and early 80s when we were one of the 10 most distressed cities in the community, and there was a feeling that Duluth, as with our other peer cities like Erie, Indiana, and Youngstown, Ohio, were in this downward spiral. And the leaders in the 80s did a fantastic job of pulling ourselves out of that downward spiral and gaining stability, but the problem was stability isn't inspiring. And so there was this built-in pessimism about Duluth. Things can't happen in Duluth, and it's the pie is only so big, and so the question is how we're going to split up this pie, you know, because it's kind of a status quo. We can't expect growth in the city of Duluth because we're not optimistic, we're not confident about our community's future. What's happened in the last 10 years, I would say, is that Duluth has started to understand that what we have to offer is something unique. It's something different. And instead of looking to Fargo and Sioux Falls and feeling bad about what Duluth has to offer, because we don't have that same sort of cornfield growth, you know, out into the suburbs, you know, we have some constraints. Our hill is a constraint. The ledge rock is a constraint. But what we have is something that those other communities can't offer. We have the natural beauty, we have the views, we have the opportunities for outdoor recreation. And in doing that, we now are feeling, you know, stronger about our offerings, and that results in more confidence, more optimism, which then leads to employers like Maurice's saying, you know what, I think Duluth is a good place for us to invest $50 million to build a downtown headquarters. That doesn't happen if there isn't confidence and optimism from the broader community. It's not just George Goldfarb being confident about Duluth. He needs to see that and feel that from the broader community so that he's confident that this is a decision that's good for Maurice's in the long run, and that his associates will enjoy being in Duluth and working there. So I think that would be the biggest thing, at least from my standpoint, that I'm hopeful that we can sustain is kind of that forward momentum and seeing opportunities, especially on the business side, to grow the pie. Because, you know, in the past, business owners would get their elbows up, right? Somebody new coming into town, hey, the pie is only so big, so if that new person comes into town, they're going to take part of my pie and I'm going to lose out. It's a very different mentality when you're looking at a growth model. And to say that they're coming into the town helps to grow the pie larger, and then we all benefit. You have a question?
Thank you so much for sharing your view. That's really a pleasure. But, so my question is about leadership and transitioning out of leadership. I've had the honor of being in several leadership roles, and I've always found it challenging to transition out of that leadership role and then become a normal member of a group again. And sometimes I think I've done that better than others. And I would imagine the larger the role, the harder that would be. So do you have anything that you're looking forward to or a plan of attack in terms of transitioning back to being a community member?
So the question was kind of the transitioning out of leadership positions, and as you can imagine, it's something that I really struggled with recently, especially because a lot of the influence of the mayor is informal, right? It's kind of the role of a symbolic leader of the community. That idea that, you know, when you're at the beginning of a term, well, the mayor's going to be around for 4 years. We can't just ignore him because this is going to continue to be an issue, or his perspective matters for a longer period of time. So the moment that I announced that I wasn't going to run for re-election, that dynamic changed. And it started pretty subtly at first. And then as time goes on, it's kind of accelerated and it's become a lot more noticeable. So we get examples for projects that, you know, especially when you're going counter-narrative or counter to the conventional wisdom, or sometimes counter to where the political energy is. And, you know, I look for those. I really enjoy the challenge of when all the political energy is going one way, and you say, but wait a minute, what if we take it a different direction? And a lot of times what happens that when you first introduce that idea, there's a tremendous amount of pushback. And people get up in arms and they say, you know, this is a terrible idea, the direction, but you're kind of moving in that direction, and kind of the issue evolves, and you may not get exactly what you were hoping for, but you kind of moved it from way over here and kind of going in that direction. So now what I found in being in this position, if somebody disagrees with me, they're kind of in stall mode, right? Because they can just wait me out, and they start having conversations with the person that's going to, you know, that they think is likely going to be the next person in this role. And, you know, they will never say it, we're waiting you out here. But all of a sudden, you see like, well, maybe we can wait until fall to have this discussion. We don't need to have it right now. Maybe we'll conduct a 3-month study that will, we'll look at all the details, and then we'll kind of engage in this conversation in October, maybe November, maybe February, So it's that sort of thing, and it is frustrating. And so what I've tried to figure out are what are the issues that I can make a difference in that my opinion will kind of come to fruition by the end of the year. And it's also a way to kind of be fair to the next mayor, because I don't want to be making decisions that may be counter to his or her opinions on an issue. And then I've made a decision, kind of invested staff resources into my opinion, and then that has to be overturned or changed in the new administration. So it is frustrating. It can, and so I'm really kind of working on letting go and just being okay with that the world moves on without me, and Duluth will be a better place. I truly do believe that our community will benefit from having fresh perspective and a different level of interest and energy than what I focused on. Yes. Update on the book, yes. This has been an extremely difficult and painful project for me, writing this book. But it's also been wonderful. And had I not started with a Kickstarter campaign in January where I say, hey, I have an idea, I'm going to write a book, will you all support me? And people were very generous and pre-ordering their books and allowing me to have some cash to pay for photographers and artists and editors to help me. If I hadn't have done a Kickstarter campaign, I would have quit this project probably 10, 15, 20 different times because it has been that difficult. My initial idea was, boy, I have all this writing that I've done over the course of my 15 years in politics, and I kind of process ideas by jotting notes or speeches that I've written or op-eds, and I'll just kind of take that and plop it into a book and it'll be easy. And what I found is that it doesn't translate very well. What I had before was not ready for publication. And so it was essentially most nights, starting in January and up until 2 weeks ago, I was up until 11 or midnight writing, spending a lot of my weekends kind of working through book details, and writing is really hard. And I have so much respect for people that write professionally because I am not that strong of a writer, what I've come to realize. But it's fun, and I think that it's a different style of political storytelling. It's 140 different essays, and they're all, some as short as 2 paragraphs, some as long as 2 full pages of text, and then a really strong visual element to it. So there's 500 pictures in this book. We commissioned some of my favorite local artists to do original art that kind of help tell the story of the essays that I've written. So I'm really nervous about it. I'm kind of anxious about the response that we'll get, and as self-publishing, I'm also nervous about the financial commitment that we've made because it's a full-color book, 300 pages, full color. It's very expensive to print. So I hope that you'll all do me a favor and buy at least 1 copy of this book for the benefit of my children. Thanks for the question. DonNessBook.com, where you can pre-order. All right, another question? What's our time? Okay, one more question. Yes? Great question. So the question was about the Duluth Traverse, 100 miles of single track, and what the city will be doing to maintain that natural surface trail. And so it is a partnership. It is the city certainly needing to increase our commitment to maintenance, and in our budget that we'll be presenting to the City Council this fall, we're going to increase our park maintenance budget because we realize as we expand our offerings and as we make out, it was a very expensive program. We said, what we'd like to do is give you the ownership of this program, and sure enough, not only have they made up for the staff commitment that the city had been doing, but they have gone well beyond that because now they own it. Same thing with the Traverse. In the past, the city could not commit to building 100 miles if we had to maintain the whole thing. But by growing a user group that has ownership of this, and they care more about that trail than city staff do, and they're going to go out, give their volunteer time, and as we grow the sport and more people get involved, hopefully we can inspire larger numbers of volunteers to come out on a regular basis. There is, the fortunate thing, as I understand it, about a single track trail, is that the first 3 or 4 years are the most critical. Because it's prior to everything being packed down, and so we're going to have to put a more maintenance effort into those brand new trails, encourage ridership, which actually helps accelerate that packing down and make it a more sustainable trail, but also it's the trail design. You know, these trails are being built by folks that really understand what they're doing. They anticipate how the water is going to flow through these trails, and so they're built in a more sustainable manner than some of the previous trails. So thank you guys, appreciate it.
Thank you very much again for sharing your wisdom and your time with us today. And I'd also like to thank the Fuse Leadership Council and the events committee. There's a lot of people that put these events on, and I really appreciate all their support. Thank you all for joining us today. Hope to see you at the next one.